27 minutes ago, SimplePlanes 2 includes a number of new visual enhancements that drastically improve the look of the game compared to SimplePlanes 1. To start, let's talk about clouds. They technically existed in SP1, but they were baked into the skybox, which pretty much meant they were fake and you couldn't fly above them, no matter how far into the sky you reached SP2's clouds. On the other hand, a volume trick powered by an asset called Enviro by Hendrik Haupt. This means they're 3D and very much real, making for a much more believable environment in the air than before. In the world settings, you can define the weather, ranging anywhere from a clear sky to dense fog to a thunderstorm. The thunder with thunderstorm, the clouds really help enhance the mood of SP2, and I hope you'll feel the same way. Let's play a little game. 2 of the 4 images in this section are references to popular media I care about. Can you figure out what they are? Clouds aren't the only major visual improvement to the game. Thanks to a couple of powerful assets, Beautify and 8 HPAL, we're able to use a number of post-processing effects to make SimplePlanes 2 look nice and polished. Processing, you might ask, without bogging you down with overly technical talk. It basically modifies the image after the game engine has rendered it in order to add extra visual enhancements to make things pop. There are 3 main things we use post-processing for: color balancing, gloom, and ambient occlusion. Color balancing lets us adjust the colors to be more vibrant. Bloom creates a glow effect on bright objects like emissive paint or a smooth metallic surface being hit by sunlight, and ambient occlusion creates soft shadows in corners and other areas that would be obscured from the ambient light. All of them can be customized in the game settings, letting you fine-tune the game's visuals to your liking. Want more bloom? No problem. Want it to be less saturated? Go ahead. Add a lot to the game's visual appeal and really help bring things up to a more modern graphical standard with a fairly modest response. If you like what you're seeing, please consider wishlisting SimplePlanes 2 on Steam if you'd like to see bits of these blogs early. Consider joining our Discord server. SimplePlanes 2 Environment Part 1 Sam Supreme in 4 months ago. Welcome to the first of many SimplePlanes 2 dev blogs. We're going to be doing one of these about every couple weeks or so. Sometimes more. Each one will showcase a multitude of features focused around a central theme. For this first post, the central theme will be on the map. We've got quite a lot to cover here. Real quickly though, if you want to see individual segments of these dev blogs several days early as they're ready, check out the National Cases channel in our official Discord server. We'd love to see you there. With the preamble over with, let's get into the exciting bits. D. The main islands, something players love to do. In SimplePlanes is zoomed by at insane speeds, but our islands have always gone by in a blink. For SP2, we want to address many of the most common criticisms we've received and push these further than ever before. New archipelago spans almost 800 km2 of highly detailed terrain, both above and below the water. So even if you get the zoomies, you'll be flying over cool terrain for a little while before you find yourself lost over endless open ocean. The archipelago consists of 3 main islands. On the northern end there's Vetesta Island. On the south there's New York Island. And separating them you'll find Milton. Each one is trapped in its own metaphorical time bubble, leading to very different vibes from one border to the next. that you'll get to see in future showcases. For these new islands, we try to find a good balance between realism and terrain features that are impressive to look at while being fun to explore. In order to achieve this, we have used a set of advanced tools to generate the terrain that combine the power of procedural noise, realistic erosion simulation, and high artistic freedom over the mainland mass. In this image, you can see the full archipelago in its various stages as we first lay down the noise, then remap it and paint some canyons, ravines, and islets around, applying multiple erosion, weathering simulations on top of it, and finishing it off by adding snow, rivers, and a few final touches before painting the different terrain. Textures using information from all the previous steps, such as the soil deposition and amount of erosion. Now let's talk about some of the tools we're using that allow us to make our terrain look way better than before. One of these tools is a terrain shader called Microsplat by Jason Booth. Without boring you too much with babble, what Microsplat allows us to do is give our terrain more and better PBR textures along with advanced rendering techniques, all while being super performant. The SimplePlanes too, this means you'll see better looking and more varied terrain than in our previous games, with more detail and without hurting performance too much. Another big step up in visual quality that we can now take advantage of is height map-based texture blending in our previous games' lens.
Two textures interacted with each other. They had a smooth blend of color and texture, but now the details of the rougher textures can sneak through the cracks as the blend happens independent of the terrain resolution. A big element that didn't age well in SimplePlanes was how stretched some of the textures would get whenever we had a tall cliff or canyon. In SP2, we can now take advantage of a technique called triplanar mapping, which samples the texture from up to 3 different angles depending on its slope. Probably one of the biggest limitations when it comes to large organic features is that the textures used result in very obvious tiling patterns as they get repeated over and over across the surface. To combat this, we now have stochastic sampling in our arsenal at the cost of a few extra texture samples. What this does is it rotates each tile at random and height blends them, entirely removing the visual tile and vegetation. As you've definitely seen by now, the map is covered in trees. Not only does this help make the game prettier, it also provides a really nice and necessary sense of scale. Another benefit is it helps make low-altitude flight feel more dangerous as the trees have colliders, which will ruin your whole day if you clip your wing while trying to be a show-off. The main limiting factor for having a lot of vegetation is that models that look good for trees require a lot of geometry, and with how large our map is, we need a lot of them. Games usually get around this by having what's called levels of detail. So as things become smaller on your screen, they switch to simplified models and sometimes even to a flat image. But simplified geometry is still too much geometry for us, despite the name of the game. And flat images look really bad as you fly by, so what now? Once again, the huge ecosystem of tried and true assets Unity provides is of great help, with 2 really good tools in particular being very handy: GPU-Y and Amplify Imposters. The first asset improves how the data for the trees flows between the CPU and GPU in a similar fashion to what Parallax does in Suno, but without the extra complexity of having a spherical planet with procedural terrain. The second creates a texture that morphs depending on the view angle, faking the illusion of depth in what can only be described as magic. We collaborated with the Amplify team to test their 1.0 release for the Imposter shader to help us have 0 compromises when it comes to foliage. Believe it or not, the trees in this GIF are a flat image with some shader trickery. Another huge challenge to overcome for a map the size of ours is figuring out how to place down the trees. Planting one by one may be meditative, but ain't nobody got time for that. For this task, Jason Booth comes back to the rescue with another great tool of his, Microverse. the main limiting factor. For ain't nobody got time for that. For this task, Jason Booth comes back to the rescue with another great tool of his, Microverse. This Swiss Army knife covers most of the flaws from the insanely underwhelming terrain tools Unity provides. It works.
Hand in hand, Lego Squad, let us do non-destructive tweaks to the island's geometry, trees, and vegetation interactively. For example, we can just ask it to place trees anywhere with grass limited to a certain altitude and slope, adjust the density and call it a day. Or even add patches of trees on demand in certain areas. In the screenshots, you can see how inside of the yellow lines there have been trees added, and the blue lines on painting the terrain in dirt, and even carving it. Caves and rivers.
When you think of a large sprawling landmass, many things come to mind. But I bet none of you thought of caves. Yup, that's right, we've done it. Now you can go hide in a hole underground, just like IRL, and never see the light of day. And maybe, just maybe, leading into that hole underground is a waterfall. Believe it or not, we have one of those too.
Caves and rivers have both been highly requested features in our previous titles, but they've been practically impossible for us to actually implement. The caves, because we couldn't do actual holes in the terrain, and the rivers, because the water could only be at sea level.
For SimplePlanes 2, though, we've actually been able to do it. We've got rivers that aren't just flat streams of water. They flow above the sea level, and we have a giant cave you cannot just explore, but even fly through if your skills allow for it.
Roads. If we're going to have such a large map, we need a way to get you to move from one end of an island to the next, besides just flying around or having to go off-road. To achieve this, we've made a huge network of highways, roads, and trails, spanning over 300 km in length across the map. If you want to get in a car and drive from one end of the archipelago to another on a road, that's totally doable. If you want to get lost in the mountains following a winding trail, we also have you covered. No driver's license required, but you better get insurance.
With the help of Microverse, all these roads merge with the terrain. Change the textures and clear the trees, allowing us to go crazy without having to worry about laying down asphalt by hand. Even for racetracks that seamlessly blend with the environment.
That does it for the first blog. Once again, if you'd like to see segments of these posts early, join our Discord server. Thank you for reading. We'll be back soon with more.
SimplePlanes 2 UI, CM Supreme Dorian 4 months ago. Welcome to the second SimplePlanes to Dev blog. If you missed the first one, you can check it out here. In it, we showed off the new SimplePlanes Archipelago and the tools we used to bring it to life. Let the archipelago out of the way for now, though. Let's talk about another big undertaking we're doing for SimplePlanes 2. The UI. Andrew has been working very hard on a new XML-based UI system for SP2 called Juicy. Replaces the ancient 9-1 whistle for mismarked UI systems we were using in SimplePlanes 1, and allows us to work on a UI at a far greater pace than before, laying the ground of a whole host of improvements to the presentation the user as we were used. Currently have to take about this. So on and 11, take the veins. Writing a new UI system from scratch took some time. But now that it's in place, it's making the development of new UIs so much faster. Need a new panel with some controls. Bam! Done before lunch. Need to tweak the style of all dialogues in the game. Already done before I could say. Already done before I could say. One of my core objectives with SimplePlanes 2 is to make the game feel alive, and that we will with improved with the ride. Now as ever new, we interactable UI element on the screen responds to you when you move up a marks over a button and swells off best clock. When we click it smashes down before returning to its normal size for middles way along. In the past. Something else this allows us to support is easy customization of the UI, whether player through simple or not so simple. XML edits, much like in Juno, new origins, some caution will need to be taken, as the game's code does reference certain bits by name. But overall, it should be much easier for modders to change the UI, or for regular players to make small styling changes if they want to, simply by going into their XML files. Layout. Now that we've gone over the behind the scenes, taking powerful looks into the freaking UI, let's talk about the actual layout. One of our main goals with the designer in SPTL is keep it familiar to long layers, lie improving, yet user is proven him punter. We're taking a lot of Zarin from Juno here. For that game's designer, we felt we had improved the UX a lot, but it had come at the cost of familiarity. In many ways, we also made it too complicated for new players to get a grasp on. In SP2, you should feel right at home, as the layout is mostly the same as in SP1, with some options move our ball into one into molds. Engines aren't by going in your life improvements. Like the escape key, no longer booting you to the title screen. Next, the in-flight layout. This should feel very familiar as the fundamentals are unchanged. But open the menu and you'll be met with a host of new options. We're at Mercury. You can now save and load crafts while in flight. Find a cool spot on the ground and want to switch to a car. Just load one from your saved crafts and it's there, with no additional loading screen. I can't tell you how much easier this makes exploration feel. Moving somewhere to take a screenshot with a specific craft is a breeze. Now, we've also overhauled the mouse as joystick UI to be better looking and do a better job of indicating your inputs. Aside from that, another big new thing here is the field button. This sends you to the designer, but unlike SP1 or Juno, it does not unload the flight scene, allowing you to quickly exit to the designer to make a quick change, and then come back in exactly the same spot you were in before. And finally, you can now access all of the game settings from anywhere. The title screen, the designer, or in flight. I've always been perplexed about SP not allowing this, but you can do it now, and it's so much more convenient. We want to make the UI and suites feel more alive than in our previous games. There's a coherent design language to life that is fine and real so far. You can never blue aces of Sam key with some Moxie and chorus fun, which results in a key that I think feels much more polished than what we've done before. And I'm excited for you all to get your hands on it. Designer environment.
You can change to make the designer look the way you want it to. Don't want a solid color void? We've got a number of more scenic back reels for you to choose from on a whim. With the lighting on your craft being updated to reflect the conditions of your chosen background. Oh yeah, that's right! The designer has actual lighting now! Finally! You can properly gauge the shininess of your tasteful metallic paint without leaving the designer, viewing it in all its glory. You can also change the angle of the overhead light as well as its brightness. Useful if you're working on brightly colored parts and need to dim the lights a bit. And you can tweak the intensity of the portions if your craft is too shiny to work with. Additionally, you can change from a few different platforms, including a dark square with a customizable glowing ring in it, the all reliable SimplePlanes gray circle, or nothing at all! You're no longer bound to either a basic set of color options or hex codes. We've given you an actual color wheel you can mess around with to your heart's content. We added this later on in the development of Juno, and it really made messing with your craft's colors a lot more convenient and fun. So I'm excited to get it into your hands as well! An auto-target option which will automatically paint the correct trim on a part according to where your cursor is. This speeds things up a lot, eliminating the need to guess or memorize the correct trim when painting your craft. And finally, hovering your mouse over a part with the paint tool or planting with the paint before you apply it. So not only takes a lot of practice, but more you flavor. You can actually see which one you're about to paint. All of these things combine to make for a much more polished feeling paint tool that is easier to use than before, making painting your craft something to really look forward to. If you make crafts with a lot of parts and or mechanical complexity, chances are you've had to struggle with finding specific parts when you need them! For SP2, we're adding a new search parts panel, which will open a list of all the parts in your craft for you to select and do various other things. Once again, those of you who play Juno will be familiar with this menu, but compared to Juno, we've made a number of improvements to make it faster! In the search panel, you can search parts by their part ID or their name to facilitate the ladder. We've added the ability to rename parts whatever you want. You can do this either in a given parts properties menu or by clicking the rename button in the search panel. Renaming parts helps you keep track of what you're doing, and it helps curious players understand what all the doodads in your craft are for. So we
And once again, if you'd like to see parts of these showcases this several day early as they're written, you can do so in our official Discord server.
Enough about the map and UI for now. This is of course a game all about building aircraft. If any of you at this point are no doubt wondering what exactly we've done to build on the experience SimplePlanes 1 and Suno New Origins gave you, will wonder no longer. For I present to you the fully procedural curvy wings of your dreams. That is a lot of words, what do they mean? Well, in essence it means Nikki has been spending nearly 5 whole years working to give you an insanely customizable new wing part that you can shape to your heart's content, right down to the Anakin airfoil shape if you want. There is no base 3D model to start, but here like the old wings had. They are created completely on the fly using magic procedural generation, and they look like actual wings instead of the boxes from before. I know those old wings are still in the game unchanged. It will be one SB, one SB, one plus loaded into SB2Us, but they'll be accessible from the parts list. These wings are such a huge addition that we'll have multiple posts to look up, so keep an eye out for those. Now let's get the introduction out of the way and show you what all this actually lets you do on a basic level. Changing the shape of your wing works much the same way as it did before. You have a 3D gizmo that you can click and drag to manipulate different parts of the wing. But in addition to that, we've given you a panel that lets you fine-tune the shape using numbers similar to the fuselage editor. I know I said we were done yapping about the UI for now, but I lied, sorry. When editing your wing, you'll notice an add section button. Click on that, and then the section will be added to the end of your wing, which you can change the shape and airflow of. More on airflows in a moment, independently of the previous section, and you can bend one section to add a curve leading to the next section for the usual wings or whatever other diabolical shapes you can come up with. The possibilities of this segment system are endless. You can have varying thickness on different parts of the wing, needing edge extensions and all sorts of complex shapes, all as a single part. No inflating the part count to get a cool wing shape. Whatever you end up doing here is just one singular part. Now, as mentioned before, you can also customize the airfoil shape. The same basic symmetric, semi-symmetric, and flat bottom options from before are still here. The 3 more bits players we've added, and then the 4-digit setting, allowing you to play around with your wings camera height, camera offset, and thickness, all majorly affecting the wing's flight characteristics. For instance, a thin airfoil will net you must try, but it'll be brutal in a stall. Different airflow shapes per wing section, with the game attempting to smoothly interpolate from one shape to the other. This adds a lot of depth to how you set up your aircraft, and we're excited to get it into your hands. When it came to aerodynamic control of your craft, your options were pretty limited in SP1. You pretty much had to either use a boring box built into the wing or an all-moving wing. using a rotator. For SP2, we've completely overhauled the way control surfaces work, adding them as independent parts in the parts list that you can freely add to your wing. These will seamlessly match the geometry of the wing and can be shaped more easily than before since they're independent parts. We've also added a number of new types of control surface. These each serve a unique function to manipulate the physics of your craft in different ways. More will likely be made over time, but as of the showcase, you can expect standard flames. These are your typical control surfaces. Use these for pitch, roll, and yaw. Or for some other unorthodox purpose, I won't judge. Brake flap. These serve the same function as the standard flap, but they can split in two to serve as air brakes when needed, useful for slowing down, or as yaw control on a Tias aircraft if you're feeling experimental. Fowler flame. They slide backwards. If you give enough control, you increase the surface area of your wing, thereby granting you extra lift, essential for takeoff and landing on most aircraft. Slash. These do a very similar thing to the Fowler flap, but the key difference is they are attached to the leading edge of your wing instead of the trailing edge or rear. These have been highly requested features for a long time, and we hope they are to your liking. Wings are cool and all, but unless you're making a flying wing, you generally need something to actually put them on. That's where the other big thing Ninja has been working on comes in. New improved fuselages. While there is lots of evidence to prove that the fuselages in SP1 are plenty capable, they do still leave a bit to be desired in terms of functionality, ease of use, especially for new players, and not being a headache for developers to work with. So for SP2, we're giving you a brand new fuselage, part from scratch, that is capable of everything the original is, but with loads of new features and optimizations. Among these new features are new ways to alter the shape of a fuselage. To start off simple, we've brought in the fine corner radius control from Suno. This means that rather than having the 4 basic corner options you're used to, you can just use a slider to make the corners however you want them. On a more technical note, we've also optimized this so that the level of detail is now dynamic, allowing us to dynamically give curved fuselage more detail and square fuselage less detail rather. And having the more basic corner options you're used to, you can just use a slider to make the corners however you want them. On a more technical note, we've also optimized this so that the level of detail is now dynamic, allowing us to dynamically give curved fuselages more detail and square fuselages less detail, rather than every shape having the same number of vertices like before. But that's not all! What about the space between the corners? We've given those some love too. You can now give each edge a bit of curvature, which will give that edge an inflated shape. This is invaluable for easy replication of a number of real aircraft cross sections, which leads nicely into our next big feature. You now have a trapezoid slider! This lets you transform the cross-section of your fuselage from a rectangle into a trapezoidal shape, or just a triangle if you go extreme enough, and works alongside the edge curve feature to give you far more control over the cross-sectional shape of a fuselage than we've ever given you before. I'm certain it's going to lead to some insane creations once you get your hands on it. Moving on from shapes, we've also completely overhauled the colliders. Colliders are now dynamically created based on the shape of your fuselage, which has a number of useful implications. But perhaps most notably, it means that hollow fuselages are actually hollow. You can move things through them, you can walk through them, you can... I don't know what else to put here, but whatever you're thinking, it's probably possible now. This is a very exciting change all on its own, and I look forward to seeing what you do with it. And finally, there are now more paint trims on the fuselage.
In addition to painting the exterior like you're used to, at long last you can now separately paint the interior and both ends. And this is all just the beginning. We have a lot of exciting plans in the pipeline for these fuselage, but we aren't ready to talk about those just yet, so keep an eye out for more info in the coming month. That concludes this dev blog. If you like what you see, please consider wishlisting SimplePlanes 2 on Steam. And if you want to see these showcases early, consider joining our Discord server.
SimplePlanes 2, Stipisu und Decals. CM Supreme Dorian 3 months ago. As many of you are keenly aware, a lot of vehicles aren't just solid color smooth metal or plastic. Some have camouflage liveries or just subtle detailing. That's where our new texturing system comes in.
In SimplePlanes 2's paint tool, you can now give each paint slot a wide variety of textures, ranging from camouflage to gradients and animal patterns. In SP2, you can choose between adding a flat texture and a wrapped texture to your paint. A flat texture is projected onto your craft from a single direction, but you can change the rotation of a wrapped texture uses triple-nor mapping, which you may recall from our previous blog about environments. Both options have their own strengths and weaknesses, with wrap coming in particularly handy in a number of cases where a full texture doesn't produce the instructed glass. Uncertain geometry.
Once you select the texture, you can now mess around with it to suit your needs. You can set a different color for each different part of the texture.
Big parts of a camel pack wasted.
And you can even override the materials on each of them, so you can have one part of your texture be shinier or flatter than another. All of this taking on only one paint slot!
You also have a bunch of settings that will allow you to change the size, rotation, and offset of your texture, allowing you to fine-tune it to fit whatever it is you're going for.
This texturing system, in combination with the new paint tools we talked about before, opens the door for a lot more artistry than in our other games. And it's a ton of fun to mess around with. While being able to paint your craft with tensors is great and all, there's a lot it doesn't let you do if you want to obsess over finer details. To fix this, we've added a brand new customizable decal board that lets you pick from a large number of different shapes and designs and place them anywhere on your craft, automatically conforming to its surface. With decals, you can easily make rivals, liveries, or even dirt and grime. Counter shading, very good on the underside of a craft. And other similar concepts should also be a breeze now. You can adjust each decal's color, opacity, width, height, rotation, and depth to fine-tune exactly how you want it to appear on your craft. You can also change the render priority for layering multiple decals on top of one another. And you can add some tiling similarly to the paint textures. These decals do have a performance cost, especially if you use a lot of them, but they should look and perform much better than fuselage art on label images while being much easier to work with. You can also import contest images as decals by dragging and dropping them into a folder, and then updating an accompanying XML file. But do note that custom decals will only work for yourself and cannot be uploaded with the craft, nor will they be visible to other players across the player unless the other players author that decal! In addition to image decals, we've also added a text decal that works the same way as an image decal, but for typing text into, allowing you to finally have text that truly conforms to your craft the way you want it to.
Our playtesters have been having a field day with the decals, and I'm confident you will too.
If you like what you see, please consider wishlisting SimplePlanes 2 on Steam.
And if you want to see these showcases early, consider joining our Discord server.
SimplePlanes 2 Fireworks CM Supreme Dorian 6 days ago. This latest death log is all about blowing stuff up. We're doing a lot to improve both the visual and gameplay experience surrounding this. So let's start off with the basics. Explosion. Visuals. No matter what you're doing in a game like SimplePlanes 2, chances are explosions will play a role whether you like it or not. With this in mind when making Aspect 2, we're taking special care to completely overhaul the explosion visuals to make them the best they've been in any of our games by adding new procedural and generated 3D effects, replacing the previous reliance on 2D sprites. Equations are a deceptively challenging thing to get looking right in video games. Most games opt for a combination of sprites and particle effects. This generally looks perfectly fine,
and I bet many of you never even noticed that the explosions in a lot of your favorite 3D games are probably mostly 2D.
but for our users this approach leaves a bit to be desired. First, transparent screens
Have an annoying tendency to render in front of things like fucking clouds, which lose your sense of depth if there happens to be a cloud between you and an explosion.
Second,
they aren't all that versatile. In a game like this, you're gonna have a lot of possible explosion scales and angles to look at them from, not to mention the ability to slow down time and pause the game, all of which makes sprites pretty obvious and not great looking. So in SP2, we're taking a different approach, using a procedurally generated mesh-based effect. We can have 3D explosion effects that can dynamically change its shape and size depending on the power of the explosion, while also looking perfectly fine if you look at it in slow motion. A weak explosion will create a relatively unremarkable fireball and a puff of smoke, whereas a very strong one may make a big mushroom cloud that scatters debris everywhere, sending a frightening message to anyone on the same island as you.
as a fun bonus, these explosions also create a brief dynamic light source around them, making evening operations a spectacle all of their own as you light up the night. This is a little detail that I personally appreciate when I see other games doing it. I think it adds a lot here, targeting fun and brand new parts coming to the game.
Targeting fun, an important goal of SP2 is not just to give you an improved experience with the things you already know from the original SimplePlanes, but also to give you an expanded sandbox to play with. To that end, I'd like to introduce you to one of the brand new parts coming to the game, the targeting pod. Targeting pods. Targeting pods are a cornerstone of modern aerial combat and reconnaissance, allowing you to guide laser-guided munitions to the target's gaze upon your friends from afar, or do both of those things at the same time and blow up your friends. Laser-guided weapons are great for stationary targets on the ground like buildings or anti-air emplacements. Ow!
Be here even if you want to destroy a moving target. There is nothing to hold your hand like with traditional guided weaponry. You will have to rely on your own skills to predict your target's movement and score a hit. To use a targeting pod, power it on, switch to air-to-ground mode, and drag the reticle to the spot you want to target. You can also slow it around using SimplePlanes keys on your keyboard.
The little camera in the targeting pod will automatically orient itself to the target position as you move around, and laser-guided weapons you deploy will immediately home in on that spot. It doesn't do all the work for you though. You will still have to take care not to fly in such a way that your aircraft locks the pod's view to the target and make sure you're close enough to the target for a bomb to actually hit. But you might be thinking, how does this let me spy on my friends? That's where another new part we're adding comes in, a multifunction display. Multifunction display, or MFD, is a screen that lets you look at a real-time feed of what your targeting pod is looking at, with zoom capabilities that let you get a clear image of a location from very far away. But that's not all it does. In reality, the MFD is an all-in-one control panel that out of the box will let you monitor your aircraft's telemetry, weapon status, and more, navigable through a bunch of buttons on the side. The targeting pod isn't the only new part we have for you in the making things go boom department. Andrew's son has been interning with us to bring something to the game that I'm really excited to share. Procedural missiles. In SP2, you'll have access to a highly customizable procedural missile that comes with a number of settings that allow you to fine-tune its functionality and appearance. Increasing its size will give it more fuel and a bigger boom, but will result in a heavier and less maneuverable missile that you can't carry as many of. Adding fins will increase its turn range and make it look pretty cool. Increasing the burn time will give it more range but less acceleration, meaning it will be less useful for short-range encounters. Increasing the seeker field of view will widen the cone at which you can obtain a lock that will effectively reduce the distance the missile can see, which means a shorter lock-on range. Those are just some of the basics though. We've also got multiple different guidance systems you can choose from to ensure the missile knows where it is at all times, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. Infrared. These have the shortest range but the fastest lock-on time and are fire and forget. They home in on the target craft's heat signature, with propellers and rotors producing the weakest heat signature and jet engines producing the strongest. Because their lock-on method is passive, the target of one of these missiles will not be able to tell they're being locked onto if you believe you are. With us, lock on time, and our fire and forget. They home in on the target craft's heat signature, with propellers and rotors producing the weakest heat signature and jet engines producing the strongest. Because their lock-on method is passive, the target of one of these missiles will not be able to tell they're being locked on to if you believe you are.
Independent danger and high missile that you may want to throttle down to reduce your heat signature and periodically deploy flares to confuse the missile. Semi-active radar.
These have longer range than ion missiles, but a longer lock-on time. They usually are built into your plane, and as such they require the user to maintain a lock until the missile hits its target in order to be effective. Unlike ion missiles, a lock-on also sends the target a warning, which gives them an opportunity to react if you're being locked by one of these. Deploy chaff and try to put a solid barrier in between yourself and the enemy craft to break line of sight. Active radar. These have the longest range and the longest lock-on time. Unlike their semi-active counterparts, these missiles use their own built-in radar to track targets, which makes them a very scary fire and forget weapon. But then extra radar equipment makes them the heaviest of the bunch, meaning you'll need a bigger and heftier missile to make the most out of them. Countering one of these is similar to the semi-active type, but with the added complication of needing to break line of sight with the missile itself, not the craft that launched it. Laser. These track a laser emitted from a targeting pod. If you're in a vehicle and in danger of a laser-guided weapon from an approaching aircraft, set a brief line of sight with it using buildings or terrain. device uses a simple solid rocket motor to propel the missile, thrust vectoring similar to solid, but gimbal to improve the missile's maneuverability. This comes at a weight cost though. Jet engine replaces the rocket engine with a jet engine. This drastically increases the missile's burn time, which increases its range, but equally it reduces its acceleration and top speed. This makes it ideal for long-range cruise missiles. Okay, now I'm done. These missiles will add a ton of depth to this game's combat sandbox, which previously left a lot to be desired. I hope you like them. If you like what you see, please consider wish listing SimplePlanes 2 on Steam. If you wanna see these showcases early, consider joining our Discord server.
SimplePlanes 2 Environments Part 2. CM Supreme Dorian yesterday. The SimplePlanes archipelago has a number of major locations to visit, each of them packed with way more love, detail, and interactivity than any of the locations in SimplePlanes 1. Half these are created by various people in the team, but for right now we're going to focus on what Kevin and Andrew have been working on. We'll start with one of Kevin's brainchildren.
Cochrane Airport, located on the coast of New York Island. Cochrane Airport is probably the first place you'll be greeted with when you play the game for the first time. I asked Kevin to provide some insight into the creative vision behind it, so I'm going to take a moment to quote him here.
Cochrane was one of our largest and most ambitious airport projects,
Inspired by the sleek, futuristic design of Shanghai Pudong International Airport, Cochrane Airport blends realism with some unique gameplay twists. It's including destructible buildings and A380-friendly infrastructure. Cochrane was one of our largest and most ambitious airport projects. Inspired by the sleek, futuristic design of Shanghai Pudong International Airport, Cochrane Airport blends realism with some unique gameplay twists, including destructible buildings and A380-friendly infrastructure.
Cochrane represents the very modern design language of New York Island, with the futuristic looking wavy roof on the terminal lovingly borrowed from Pudong Airport, a sprawling layout that's been hyper-optimized for the heaviest of air traffic, and more.
A major design goal here was to be able to accommodate the largest passenger aircraft the real world has to offer, the Airbus A380. This turned out to not be a trivial undertaking, with several parts of the airport needing to be redesigned early in development because they were simply too small for this behemoth of a plane. But it has been done, which means this airport is probably also perfectly equipped to handle whatever you can throw at it,
provided it isn't much more ludicrous in size than an A380.
Beyond that, Cochrane has a number of fun play spaces, including plenty of hangars.
Big and small, complete with having it doors.
Fire station you can hang out inside of, and an oversized parking lot with a multi-story parking garage. We set out to make a believable space that also doesn't compromise on fun gameplay opportunities, and we believe we've achieved that. Shepherd Airport, sitting on the opposite side of the archipelago to Cochrane by a little forest on Vetusta Island. Shepherd Airport is another of Kevin's creations. As with Cochrane, I'll quote Kevin here.
Shepherd Airport, our love letter to the mid-century charm that Montgomery Field, now part of Dallas.
Unlike Cochrane's sprawling modern hubs, Shepherd is a compact, retro-inspired airport that captures the spirit of aviation's golden era of prop liners and early jets. Before DFW existed, Amon Carter Field,
later renamed Greater Southwest International,
was Fort Worth's premier airport, opening in 1953 with a sleek, space-age inspired terminal. In contrast to Cochrane, our goal at Shepherd was to create a nostalgic space that still functioned as an airport. When you visit, you'll soon notice. In contrast to Cochrane, our goal with Shepherd was to create a nostalgic space that still functioned as an airport. When you visit, you'll soon notice.
structure that it seems to be stuck in a different era. Shepard's neon signage, glass walls, distinct mixture of rectangular and curved shapes and beige coloring define its aesthetic to create a cozy symbol of the past. Functionally, you will find Shepard's an obvious burst that's almost concrete bay and designed for the propeller airliners and early jet airliners of the 1950s and early 1950s and early 1960s. It's relatively narrow taxiway, smaller hangars, singular main runway, less smart cross-linked runway 2, and lack of concrete use. Concourses make it impractical for anything much larger than an A320. This more compact layout lends Shepard its own charm though. Fun things to do besides playing in clothes, hanging out in the old tiny hangars with your friends. Or if you're feeling confident about your skill behind the wheel, you can try and drive fast with the little support beams holding up the big hallway sticking out of the terminal. Shepard is a labor of love to a forgotten chapter in aviation history, one with a lot of wonder to it that we wanted to give the law the respect it deserves. Airports are the only major locations of interest in the archipelago. After all, if you're taking a flight to a regional airport, you're probably going there for a reason. Follow the main road south from Shepard Airport, and you'll find yourself in Fantastic City. Those of you who played Suno New Orleans after its 1.0 release may be familiar with Suno Village, a quaint little village high in the mountains. This was our first ever foray into making an actual settlement in one of our games rather than just strictly functional spaces like airports or aircraft carriers. Now take Suno Village, scale it up by about an order of magnitude, and you have Vector's the city. With a total area of approximately 1.5 square kilometers and over 1,000 buildings, each of them manually placed, Vector's is our first ever full-fledged city, and its longest axis, the city spans 2.5 kilometers in length, full of roads, alleys, and buildings. It's a really fun and atmospheric space that helps the world feel truly alive. Some of you may have already noticed that Cochrane Airport and Shepard Airport are named after significant figures in aviation history that each pushed the boundaries of what was possible in their time. Jacqueline Cochrane, the first woman to break the sound barrier, and Alan Shepard, the first American to go to space. All our runs too have made it into their names. They represent the cultural divide between them, with one embracing tradition and the other looking to modernity. Vector's the island, and by extension, Vector's the city represents the former of those two. Vector's is an archaic Spanish word for very old, with the city's design reflecting the set at the foot of the castle. Vector's the city takes heavy inspiration from those old European cities that compose with centuries of history, bringing elements of the past with them everywhere rather than abandoning them. I'm curious what you imagine the history of this city being like.
In order to make a city that meets our goals for scale, visuals, and performance, we had to step back and think outside the box a little. Buildings with a lot of detail look good, but they're computationally expensive to render, which means if you have a lot of them, you'll leave a large dent in the player's frame rate, which goes against our goal of making a game that can be played on relatively modest hardware. On the other hand, low detail buildings impact frame rates much less, which means you can use more of them, but they have the drawback of being low detail, so they may not feel very immersive. Our approach for SimplePlanes 2 is much closer to the low detail end, but we've come up with some tricks to keep things looking believable while maximizing performance. Our city buildings are procedurally generated to allow for easy setup and control. When we're placing them down, they use very simple geometry to save performance. To achieve the appearance of higher detail, we cheat by using some fun tricks with shaders and textures. Building colors get randomized based on where they are, so you're not always looking at identical ones. Individual windows have their lights turn on and off based on the time of day and whether they're facing the sun and more. For the textures, we've been working with an Argentinian woman named Sol. Fun fact, we've worked with her before. If you listen closely, you may hear her in Juno. New origins. These textures utilize normal mapping and physically based rendering, PBR techniques to achieve a sense of depth and higher detail. Despite the buildings being extremely simplistic behind the scenes, this allows each building to punch above its weight a bit in terms of detail versus performance cost, thus allowing us to make a nice looking city without sacrificing too many of your precious frames. That's just a castle, like many of its real-world inspirations. At the heart of That's Just a City lies a large medieval-style castle set atop a hill. Our primary source of inspiration for the design of the Tosta Castle was the numerous medieval castles scattered throughout France with their highly functional yet beautiful Gothic designs that are so iconic they inspired an entire genre of fiction. Our castle is made up of numerous modular sections we created, allowing us to streamline the creation of castles and forge with a mix and match system. We can bend to our will, gatehouses, towers of multiple shapes and sizes, destructible bridges, and more, all in our little box of castle flavored goodies. Vestas, the castle itself, is a sprawling complex with multiple large buildings split by a river, cutting through the hill and meeting with the sea. Thick stone walls adorned with guard towers protect much of the castle from would-be invaders. The difficult terrain surrounding it serving as an additional line of defense. Large bridges connect the buildings across the... For the textures, we've been working with an Argentinian woman named Sol. Fun fact, we've worked with her before. If you listen closely, you may hear her in Juno. New origins. These textures utilize normal mapping and physically based rendering, PBR techniques.
River, conveniently being wide enough for you to sneak a vehicle onto. This castle is a lovingly created space designed to enhance the game's atmosphere and create fun gameplay opportunities. If you can believe it, we still have more than enough to show off on the later days. If you like what you're seeing, please consider wishlisting SimplePlanes 2 on Steam. If you'd like to see bits of these vlogs early, consider joining our Discord server. SimplePlanes 2, multiplayer, and chat. CM Supreme Dorian 6 minutes ago. This latest blog post is all about multiplayer and Major Chad.
Arguably the biggest game changer in all of SimplePlanes 2 is the built-in multiplayer. There's so much fun to be had messing around with your friends
Or with strangers.
and our playtesters have had a really good time with it. Multiplayer is something that was possible in SimplePlanes 1 with the mod, but it was quite limited and unintuitive to use. Among its problems were hosting and joining lobbies, as the host needed to download a separate executable,
Potentially in addition to other stuff.
as well as give people their IP address, and the person joining had to know the server info,
Often buried in an old forum somewhere.
and input it in-game to join.
XP2 makes this process much simpler from the main menu. Simply click the multiplayer button and you'll get a nifty server browser where you can host or join a multiplayer lobby in seconds. To host a lobby, click create server. Set a name, maximum player. Play with up to 50 players. Limit privacy and you're set. Once in the game you can also set the server tick rate and a per craft part limit, as well as control the time of day, weather, and amenities. To join a lobby, just click the join button on any of the listings in the server browser and click join server. Enter player ID and also join your friends to the team. Immediately join the host and can start doing shenanigans together. Once you're in a multiplayer lobby, you're pretty much free to do whatever you want. Blow each other up, do challenges and races together, chill on the beach or whatever else. If you open your menu, you can access a player list that lets you pick a player. You're the host. Copy their craft. It will prevent people from copying your craft in the settings or teleport next to them. They say a picture speaks 1,000 words, so I've compiled a bunch of pictures in the form of a montage rather than go into exhaustive detail on all that's possible in multiplayer. Most of this footage was captured over the last few months by our playtesters, and the such includes some outdated content. How to capture the essence of multiplayer. Enjoy. Link to Mazda. A common criticism we heard with Suno, the Origins in particular, is that it lacked a certain charm to it. For a game with a focus on multiplayer, like SB2, it seemed pretty important to address that criticism. Enter Major Chad, a peculiar person of many talents, who serves as both the mascot for SB2 and as an avatar for the player. To bring Chad to life, we brought in an expert. Alexandre is a professional regional 3D driver. With well over a decade of experience, he works on numerous having worked on numerous high-profile projects, including 5 Star Wars movies, plus a few episodes of The Mandalorian, Arrival, Pacific Rim, and more. We've been very fortunate to be able to collaborate with him, and the results are better than we ever could have hoped. As an aside, he's also a co-founder of a small Quebec-based team called Renner Studios, who are currently working on their own game. I'm sure he'd appreciate it if you checked them out. We asked him a bunch of questions for this post to get some insight into his creative process and other thoughts, which we'll go through now in a nice and compact interview format. What were your first impressions of SP2 when we first talked?
The first time I discovered SimplePlanes, I found it to be a truly unique game. I was impressed by the level of customization available for the planes. It immediately connected with my creative side, so adding a character to that universe was something I found genuinely exciting. What software did you use to bring him to life? I used Maya for modeling and rigging, Substance Painter and Photoshop for texturing, and ZBrush for sculpting. What was the most technically challenging part of the process? The most technically challenging part of the project for me was keeping everything organized and clear. With many different rich clothing pieces and multiple texture files, it would have been easy to lose track. But with new challenges come new opportunities for improvement. Working on Major Chad, I had to create some custom tools to speed up and simplify those repetitive tasks. Facial expressions are a big part of Major Chad's job. How did you approach creating them? Creating facial blend shapes is one of my favorite parts as a 3D character generalist. That's where I get to bring the character's personality to life, and every character is unique. The secret behind well-done blend shapes lies mostly in having clean, well-structured topo. Many artists shy away from topology because it's considered technical, but once you've mastered it, it actually gives you more artistic freedom to create appealing and anatomically accurate expressions. How does making a character for a video game compare to making one for a film? The big difference lies in optimizing the model to run smoothly in a game engine. For Major Chad, the polygon count is much lower than for a movie character, and the deformation complexity is also reduced to ensure real-time performance. The challenge is to maintain a high-quality aesthetic despite those constraints. If Major Chad were to be cast in a movie, who should play him? Definitely Jim Carrey. To complement his dashing looks, Chad has a diverse wardrobe that allows him to dress for any occasion, whether it's practical, formal, or casual. In SP2, we have 4 outfits to choose from. For now, each one able to be recolored to any set of colors you want in order to suit your needs. And some of them can even have certain elements added or removed entirely, like taking off a helmet or a jacket. There's a surprising amount.
with chat's customization, leading to a multiplayer experience where no one player looks quite the same, yet they all share the same recognizable character. Chat doesn't just stand around and look pretty, he serves as a means for you to interact with your craft and the game world in ways you never could before. He can walk, crouch, jump, swim, jangly push things around, and more. Perhaps most importantly of all, though, is what happens when you give him a chair to sit in. First off, when you go into first person, the camera will gently tilt left or right as your craft rolls around to mimic the way a real person would tilt their head to match the horizon. This adds an extra layer of immersion to flying your crafts around, and if you don't like it very much, you can adjust its intensity in the game settings. Next, we have puppeteering. What is puppeteering? Well, aside from being a metaphor for chat's utter helplessness to the whims of the player, he doesn't mind. It's a way for you to define how chat interacts with your craft when he's sitting down, using a process called inverse kinematics. Don't worry, you don't have to know what that means. You can define a cockpit part for each of chat's hands, elbows, knees, and feet to stick to, and they'll automatically move with those parts in a natural way. Fun fact, at one point during development, volumetric output can disconnect from things that are too far away, resulting in able to be stretched beyond recognition. This is a feature we had added in Suno. But like a simple-minded brute, Chad is able to wrap his fingers around certain parts and magically grab them when a need arises. Unlike the hands just sort of awkwardly floating next to the park like in judo. Puppeteering helps make Chad more than just someone who sits idly in whatever seat you give him. And it will be an instrumental tool for properly scaling cockpits for VR whenever we implement support for it into SP2. If messing around in multiplayer with your friends seems exciting to you, please consider wishlisting SimplePlanes 2 on Steam. And if you want to see early sneak peeks of these blogs, consider joining our Discord server. SimplePlanes 2 graphics. CM Supreme Dorian 27 minutes ago. SimplePlanes 2 includes a number of new visual enhancements that drastically improve the look of the game compared to SimplePlanes 1. To start, let's talk about clouds. They technically existed in SP1, but they were baked into the skybox, which pretty much meant they were fake and you couldn't fly above them no matter how far into the sky you reached. S-Clues clouds, on the other hand, are volume trick. Powered by an asset called Enviro by Hendrik Haupt. This means they're 3D and very much real, making for a much more believable environment in the air than before. In a world settings, you can define the weather ranging anywhere from a clear sky to dense fog to a thunderstorm. The clouds really help enhance the mood of SP2, and I hope you'll feel the same way. Let's play a little game. Two of the 4 images in this section are references to popular media I care about. Can you figure out what they are?
post-processing. Of the 4 images in this section are references to popular Mio. Clouds aren't the only major visual improvement to the game, thanks to a couple of powerful assets, either via an HPDM, or able to use a number of post-processing effects to make SimplePlanes 2 look nice and polished. Voice post-processing might pass without bogging you down without any technical talk. It basically modifies the image after the game is rendered in order to add extra visual enhancements to make things pop. Assuming things to make things SimplePlanes 2 move post-processing look fast. There are 3 main things we use post-processing for color balancing, bloom, and